Hello, happy Monday and day 6 of our challenge. I'm in my big office chair today, a bit more serious, but I hope you all had a really great weekend. It was so good to see some of your food posts throughout the weekend. It definitely keeps me very inspired. At the moment, we don't have an oven to cook in, so I'm very limited to what I can cook. But as soon as our oven is back in order, I'll start posting some of the food and meals that I prepare. We have some family staying with us as well, so it might be good to see how we prepare for a few more people. But yeah, when that's all up and running, I'll post some meals that I cook. But yeah, so good to see some of your meals, and they look great. You guys are doing so well. The macro balanced video that I shared of Emma, who is another fantastic nutritionist in here, she explains the macro balanced meal really well and gives you some really great examples. And if you go back to, I think it was the second video I did last week, you will find a big list of good carbs, good proteins, good fats, and how you can create a really good macro balanced meal, because that's what we're all about in here. So today, following on from Friday and the macro balanced meals, I wanted to post or to talk about one specific macro in particular, and then tomorrow and the next day I'll be covering the other two. So today we're going to look into carbohydrates, because I feel like this might be the most sensitive or the most talked about or the most questioned even. And there's definitely a lot of information around, or a lot of misinformation around, that I kind of want to, bring it back to base and make it as simple as possible for you guys, which is what we're all about. So before I go into carbohydrates in specific, I kind of want to touch on, I guess, like what's out there at the moment, the information that is out there surrounding carbohydrates and different diets. So there's a few that come straight to mind, which is things like the keto diet and just low carbohydrate diets, or even some forms of fasting. There's all these different things that essentially eliminate this entire macro altogether, so carbohydrates. And these diets are based around the other two, which are fats and protein. So you're essentially getting rid of one entire macro from your plate. And I just want to say that, these diets are wonderful for the specific person, a specific person. And I might give them to someone depending on what their needs are, what their background is, what their history is, what their body is, what their goals are, etc., etc. There are so many variations that come into play for me to be able to sit down and tell a client we're going to be following this certain kind of diet. Because, there are some positives to it. I'm not going to deny that. Not for everyone though. And what I'm talking about is keto specific meals or low carb diets, things like that. There can be some benefits for it, but for the everyday person, there are way more negatives to these kind of diets, because the main thing is you are getting rid of an entire macronutrient, and they just aren't sustainable. It isn't sustainable. You might get short-term results from it, maybe 4 weeks, and you'll get the short-term effects, but long-term, these diets tend to have negative effects rather than positive, especially for women, unfortunately. Because a lot of the studies and data and research that is done around these diets, so the keto diet I'm talking about, and even fasting, is on men. So even if there is some really great positive research around these diets, typically they're leaning towards all male dominant research, which the females have a very intricate and very sensitive body, speaking of hormones, and so do men as well. But I feel like we are the center of all of this diet media and diet myths and things like that. So yeah, I just wanted to cover that first. And in this group, we are all about sustainability. I'm passionate about teaching you guys today how to incorporate a whole food, macronutrient dense diet that you can do today, that you can follow next week, that you can follow a year from now, that you can follow 10 years from now, and you can teach your kids, they can teach their kids, and you get the picture. Like, this is sustainable stuff, and this is long-term stuff. This isn't short-term, because generally short-term diets and nutrition things, and they last for 4 weeks and they're awesome, but then they slowly get more complicated, and that's not what I want to give you guys. So in saying that, let's talk about carbohydrates and what I love about them and how to go about including them in your meals, and the best sources as well. So when I think of carbohydrates, especially when I think of gut health, I straight away go to fiber, because carbohydrates are typically our best source of fiber, and fiber is just so amazing when we're talking about gut health, when we're trying to repair our gut health, and it is one of the most important ways to impact our microbial health and our health in general. So I'm talking about fiber, and I'm not going to mention carbohydrates anymore, because when I think of carbohydrates, I think of fiber, and I think that's the most important thing that we should all be thinking about when we think of carbohydrates. So let's talk about the two types of fiber that can come out of the carbohydrates we eat. And these are, you probably heard about these, but there's one that's soluble fiber and there's one that's insoluble fiber. I kind of jumped ahead, but let's talk about what fiber is. That's pretty important. So there's two types, but in general, fiber passes through the small intestine and is predominantly digested in the large intestine and our colon as well. So this is why it's really, really important for bowel movements, and it has a really good impact on our bowel movements. So it's unchanged until it gets to the large intestine. So it goes through the whole digestive process, and then it gets to the last little bit, and this is where the magic happens. So in the large intestine, fiber gets absorbed, or more importantly, broken down and digested, or I should say it gets fermented, which is really one of the best things that happens, is that it gets fermented by our bacteria in the large intestine and our colon. And what it produces is something called short-chain fatty acids. So you may have heard about these guys, but they're so important for digestive health, immune health, brain health, and also our metabolism. So they're super, super important. And the best thing to be able to produce these short-chain fatty acids is fiber. So we really don't want to be eliminating this main source of fiber, carbohydrates. We don't want to be eliminating carbohydrates from our diet. So what actually happens when the bacteria is fermented in the large intestines is it actually changes the pH of your large intestine. It becomes more acidic, and it's actually in these acidic conditions in your large intestine that all of your beneficial bacteria starts increasing and growing. And actually the maybe opportunistic bacteria or the harmful bacteria starts to die off. So fiber is so important because it can help restore the balance, it can help increase those beneficial bacteria, and ultimately repair your digestive system through this process. And there has been some really interesting research and data that's come out that show a diet that is low in fiber or low in carbohydrates. When we don't have this fiber source in our body, our microbes actually start to eat away at protein in our gut lining. So we know about leaky gut and things like that, where our gut lining starts breaking and there's little channels that start opening for toxins. So when we don't have fiber present in our body, the microbes start to actually chew away at the protein molecules in the gut lining. And this is where we get inflammation. This is where autoimmune diseases start to come about. So we're all bringing this back to fiber and just how important it is. So let's go back to the two types of fiber, which are insoluble and soluble. These are the main two types. And then we also have resistant starch, which I'm going to actually separate and not kind of talk about today, but I'll touch on it later on in our 30-day challenge. But main two, soluble, insoluble. Soluble, the main difference is soluble attracts water and it forms like a thick gel, and insoluble absorbs the water and it kind of creates like a bulk that softens our stools. So soluble attracts water and creates like a thick gel, which actually like slows our digestion. And some benefits of it are like it helps you feel fuller for longer. It can actually stabilize your blood sugar. And then insoluble absorb waters, it bulks your stool. So it's really important to help keep your bowels really regular. If you do struggle with constipation, it can just soften them a little bit, make it easier. But then on the other spectrum, fiber also kind of helps both ends because it can help bulk up your stool as well and prevent diarrhea. So soluble, insoluble, both are super important and both are really crucial parts of what fiber does in your body. So I'll do like a post just to summarize, but the top of my head, insoluble fiber, the best kind, I mean like where you can get it from whole grains, cruciferous vegetables, so like a cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, things like that. You can get insoluble fiber. You can also get it in dark leafy greens. You can get it in root vegetables, so like your sweet potato, your pumpkin, your carrot, and then onions is another really great source of insoluble fiber. So you'll kind of see a pattern here that fruit and veggies are like a really, really great source of insoluble fiber and soluble fiber as well. So that's why I harp on about vegetables and fruit and making sure you're getting good amounts of those whole foods every day. And then we flip it and we look at soluble fiber. The best is fruit and vegetables, also nuts and seeds and legumes are a really, really good source of soluble fiber. Psyllium husk, which is another one, and you can include this in smoothies and things like that. It actually helps thicken things up. So you could use it in quite a few things, like in porridge. You could put it on top of your yogurt, things like that. And then oats. Oats is another great source of soluble fiber. So this video is short and sweet. Carbohydrates, think fiber, and now you understand why we need that in our diet, especially if you're coming from a gut health perspective, which everyone in this group should be thinking about that. And what happens when we eliminate this macronutrient of carbohydrates is we're not getting this fiber intake that we need. So you can get some from nuts and seeds, you can get it from psyllium husk, that's soluble fiber, but then our insoluble fiber comes predominantly from root vegetables, greens, cruciferous vegetables, all of those things that are typically like cut out if you're on a low carb or keto diet where you get rid of that macronutrient altogether. So I would really recommend whenever you're looking at your plate and adding that carbohydrate element to your meal, think about fiber and think about what sources you're getting in, and if you are getting in that good fiber in your meal, and change it up a little bit. The body loves a little bit of diversity, so different types of fiber every day is really good. So I do want to put like just a few little side notes now that coming towards the end of this video. And because we are in this month and we're looking at gut health in specific, just some things that I would recommend is that if you are struggling quite a lot with gut symptoms, or you do have a lot of digestive health issues, I would be really cautious about introducing gluten-free grains such as rice and even gluten-free oats, things like that. Some of the whole grains, some of the rice and sometimes quinoa, your pearl barley, your spelt, things like that. I would just be really cautious. I'm not saying don't try them, but sometimes they can be a little bit inflammatory for an already compromised gut. So I'm not saying don't try them. Maybe try it out, see how you feel. Because they are quite high in resistant starch, which is the third type of fiber that I kind of don't want to talk about too much because I don't want to give you an overload of information. And we're going to actually talk about it on its own later in this 30 days. If you do have questions, go ahead and comment on the video, but I want to put this in its own video altogether. So, and then the other thing I would be cautious about, and just put a little side note, is that with your nuts and seeds and with your grains, they do contain something called lectins, which is kind of like, the best way I can explain it, it's like the barrier around that grain or around the nut that essentially protects anything outside from destroying that. So it can be quite hard to break down. And the best way to get rid of this is just by soaking your grains, soaking your legumes even, and soaking your nuts and seeds. It may seem like a long process, but once you get into the habit of it, it's really worth it because you're getting rid of that hard outer shell of the grain and the nut and the seed. And if you're in this group, you have some gut health issues, it might be a really, really important step that you need to take before you eat your grains, before you eat your nuts and seeds. So I will put up a post about how to soak your grains and prepare them, and how to soak your nuts and seeds and prepare them. I know Leela in this group, her Instagram is Good Gut Garden, and she's an amazing cook. If you need some recipes, go to her website. But I think she might have some instructions on how she soaks her grains. So if you want to see more, go on there. I should actually check first, but if you want to go on there, go for it. But if she doesn't, I'll do a little post about how I soak them. But yeah, these are just some side notes that I would really recommend just to help the digestion and breakdown and get the most nutrients out of that fiber source. And sometimes the lectins and the hard outer shell can prevent that and actually stir up your gut even more. But there are some pseudo grains. Well, they're kind of like fake grains because they're not really grains, but we identify them as grains. So buckwheat is a really great source, and these are awesome sources of fiber, insoluble fiber. So buckwheat, amaranth, which is not one we really hear often, but you could really experiment with it. I think it's really good for porridge if you cook it long and slow. And quinoa could be good as well. It's a pseudo grain. But yeah, just try them out, see how you feel. But they are good sources of fiber, but they can sometimes be a little bit hectic on the gut to start with. So maybe you could slowly introduce them the more you get into your gut health journey and start healing your gut. So I'll leave it there because we're nearly at 20 minutes. And yeah, if you have any questions, comment below. I will do a follow-up post a little bit later just to summarize everything. But think carbohydrates, great thing. Always think of fiber when you think of carbohydrates and how you can get the most fiber into your meal. That's it. Have a good day.